You're listening to the Talent Therapy Podcast. Here, you'll find discussions around recruiting trends and best practices with talent acquisition leaders in the biotechnology and pharmaceutical industries so that you and your team are informed and up to date in an ever-evolving space. And now, here's your host, Chris Tamburini.
All right, everybody, welcome to today's edition of the Talent Therapy Podcast. Today, we have a good friend of mine, Katie McGee, and I will let Katie introduce herself.
Thanks, Chris. Hi, everyone. I'm Katie McGee. I'm the Global Head of Talent Attraction and Executive Search at Biogen, and I'm excited to get to talk to you today about all things talent acquisition.
I love it. So, well, first off, I guess maybe you can tell the audience a little bit more about your role in your company and what specifically your company does and how your role helps drive your organization.
Sure. So Biogen is a Cambridge-based role in Massachusetts, or Cambridge-based company in Massachusetts. At Biogen, we really develop treatment therapies for some of the most devastating neurological diseases, things like MS, SMA, Alzheimer's. We're working on ALS and, many other things. So just a quick plug, it's an amazing company to work for, and I'm super happy to get to speak to you guys today about some of the things that we're doing at Biogen.
Awesome. So maybe you can tell the listeners how you got into TA. What path did you take to get into TA and recruiting to begin your career there?
So like many recruiters, my path was not very straight. I never, growing up, I didn't imagine myself getting into HR or talent acquisition. I think it started when I moved back home to Michigan many years ago to be with my sister, actually, whose husband had deployed at the time. So I kind of on a whim decided to move home and be with family. And I was lucky enough to work for a logistics company. At the time, it was based in Ann Arbor. And I got into, I would say, sort of the ground floor of recruiting. Really most of what I was doing was screening resumes and, checking for compliance and screening groups of candidates for some of our different service centers. And from there, I got recruited by Biotech, which that's, where Chris, I had the fortune of meeting you, and worked within their scientific division, in a variety of roles. And then next thing I knew, I ended up at Biogen. So I guess that's kind of how I weaved my way into, what I'm doing now.
Yeah, it's funny. I think everyone I've spoken with ends up in recruiting or talent acquisition by mistake. It's never a plan. No one goes to school and they're like, I'm going to be a recruiter. Most people don't even know it exists.
Right.
When they get out of school and they just kind of find themselves in it.
I'm always surprised when I'm speaking to, some of our early career talent, and they tell me that they have a concentration in, HR or recruiting. Now they even have, some focuses there. So I'm always surprised because I think when, like you said, when a lot of us were getting into the space, we kind of fell into it in a variety of ways. I myself was a business major, concentration in marketing, and I always thought I would, run an ad agency one day. I had no idea. I didn't even know what recruiting was, but, I'm so glad that I found it because I feel like it is the perfect career for me. I don't know if that's how you feel, Chris.
I do feel that it's the perfect career, and I am happy that I found it. And it was kind of on a whim, and someone explained to me what recruiting was. And, I have a science degree, but I wanted to go into business, and it just seemed to make sense. I was like, oh, that's great. I get to stay connected to the science, but I'm not in a laboratory, and I get to work with people who are developing drugs and therapeutics. And there's a huge business and a sales and even a marketing component, which I think we'll talk about later. So yeah, I feel the same way. I mean, you and I have been doing this probably for the same amount of time. I mean, I've been doing it my entire career, so 15 years, and I think you've been doing it about the same amount of time, right?
Yeah.
So you actually said something which is interesting to me, and you probably have more exposure to this than I do. And you said some of the newer hires you've seen in TA, they actually come in and they graduate with like a concentration in HR, which I've heard about, but I haven't heard about the concentration in recruiting. Is that so? That's a real thing. People are taking talent acquisition and recruiting tracks in their college experience.
Yeah, I don't know the specifics, but I am always caught off guard when I talk to students or new folks within the HR organization, or that are just working in the field generally, and they went to school for this, right? They chose this HR path, and they know they want to get into recruiting, and they seek out that education. And to me, that is just a wild shift from where I came from. And I love it because I feel like the things that I'm learning from, some of these individuals that are coming in is just incredibly impressive. I'm so impressed by, the caliber of talent within HR, not just at Biogen, but, more broadly that I see. I think it is because there is more of a focus on education, and building a foundation versus, you and I who kind of stumbled into it and were lucky enough to, make it through. But yes, it's wild things for me.
Yeah, no, it kind of blows my mind a little bit just based on, like you said, the way we got into it, which was kind of a mistake.
Yeah.
And by mistake, yeah, and then people are actually focusing on it now. So, that kind of leads me to my next question for you. I have to imagine in your role, you're global head of talent attraction and executive search at a large company. Biogen is what? How many people? How many thousand people is Biogen?
Gosh,
roughly.
I don't have many thousand. I mean, I want to say we're close to 9,000 now.
Okay.
You don't know that, but.
I mean, that's bigger than I thought. But I think at this point, you guys would be considered a large or larger pharma or biotech. You don't really fall in that mid-size or startup. Definitely not startup. But I wouldn't even say you guys are mid-size anymore. I'd say you guys are a large biotech, right?
So it's really interesting. That's a really interesting question because I think I get that question a lot. And I would say we fall somewhere between, the really large, massive pharma organizations that I'm sure, you could rattle off, and your smaller, I wouldn't even say startup biotechs, but your smaller biotech organizations that, you can find all over, Cambridge and Boston. So I would say we're really in the middle. I think I've described it a number of ways. Sometimes we'll describe it as we've got pharma muscle with a biotech brain or a biotech heart, which I really like because I think, when I think about how agile and pioneering the organization is, along with what we can accomplish when we're all working towards the same thing, I think it's absolutely, incredible to be a part of. So I think it's a really nice sweet spot for me personally, to be a part of an organization that sort of sits in between those two things.
Yeah, no, that's interesting take, and probably a little different than I viewed it. So it's good to hear it from your perspective, especially when you're trying to market and promote the company. And so I guess my next question really is, in your role, I assume you're not doing tactical on the ground recruiting, screening out candidates. And if that's wrong, please tell me. But from what I understand, it's not what you're doing. But I think what you are doing is probably focusing on the bigger picture and how that brand goes to the market and what that brand looks like, and how candidates and the market are absorbing what Biogen does. Mm-hmm. And maybe you can tell me, and maybe you can tell the listeners a little bit about Biogen's branding and marketing strategy, and how they're trying to position themselves and differentiate themselves from some of the other smaller biotechs that maybe offers things that Biogen can't offer. And maybe that's a good thing, or maybe it's a not good thing, or maybe it's a competitive thing. But I'm curious to hear your take and and how your role really intertwines with building that brand for Biogen.
Yeah, you're right. A big part of what I think about is the larger picture. So my role at Biogen actually encompasses a few different centers of excellence. So, I think about employer branding and recruitment marketing. We have a university programs team. We also have our executive search function that sits within our group, and then also our traditional talent attraction team that is out engaging with the marketplace. So I think there is sort of this theme of employer branding and recruitment marketing and engaging with the external market that, is something that I'm really passionate about and something that I love to see. So yeah, that is a big piece of, of my role. And, what I'll say is that it's so competitive now, for some of the best talent, that you really have to be very intentional about ensuring the market understands, who you are as an organization, what you have to offer, what it's going to feel like to be a part of that team, what impact they're going to have. I mean, I think candidates now are so much more savvy in that respect. They want to work for an organization that they believe in and that they believe is doing the right things and making the right decisions, and also has interesting science, and also cares for their employees, and also, has a really strong corporate social responsibility platform. So I think it's really important and also very challenging to ensure that we're bringing all of those different aspects for what a candidate is looking for in an employer, and ensuring that we're bringing that to the market and making sure that everyone can get a sense for, what the organization is about.
Interesting. Okay. I guess from a tactical perspective, how do you approach that? Like, tactically, how do you kind of get that message out to the ground floor, if you will?
Yeah, well, I will say I am so lucky to be surrounded by an absolutely incredible team. And, our employer branding and recruitment marketing function is, in my opinion, stellar. So I will say that I luckily, have a lot of help when thinking about those things. But what I will say is what we think about and how we approach that from a tactical perspective is trying to meet candidates where they're at. So, a lot of that has to do with social and digital marketing, and of course you think of LinkedIn, but Google, Facebook, there's a variety of social channels, YouTube, that, even your career site, that you really have to think about, how is your employer value proposition showing up, and how are we reaching our target audience? There is, besides digital, I mean, there are so many different things you can do, some that we do at Biogen, some we don't, but, when you think about engaging with some of the scientific journals and branding yourself within those journals, sponsoring, events and conferences and scholarships, or anything that, you feel really helps to showcase your employer brand, even to your traditional marketing things like bus wrapping and, some of the more traditional advertising techniques that you might be familiar with. I mean, those are all different ways that you can reach your employee base, So I think it's a very complex and evolving role, because I think employer branding from a function is relatively new, or maybe it's not new, but I think it's naive in terms of its evolution. So, we've always thought about branding from a corporate perspective, and I think there is now a much bigger focus on separating out, the organizational brand from the brand of the employer and what it feels like to work for that company, right? So as an example, if you take, any brand, Coca-Cola, there is a difference in Coca-Cola as a product that you or I might purchase or not purchase, and what it feels like to be a part of the Coca-Cola team, right? And so that's, I think, the difference when you think about employer branding, that it really is an intentional shift to separate from the product. Although I will say at Biogen, a lot of the focus is on the impact of the work. that we do as an organization, and I think that's really valuable to a lot of people. So I mean, it's not that you ever completely get away from what we do, but I just think it's a different focus when you think about branding.
Yeah, that's a really interesting topic, and you're talking about the differentiation between product marketing, right? Mm-hmm. And then there's a whole team that I understand deals with that, and then what is the employee experience at Biogen? Do you find there's a lot of crossover? Does the product marketing group cross over with the employee or employer branding marketing, or is it totally separate functions?
Well, I think there's a lot of synergy. So, I think that every organization is set up differently when they think about how they market their employer brand. So, like how these functions organizationally line up in any company is probably a number of different ways. At our organization, employer branding falls within a talent acquisition function and is separate from, let's say, our corporate affairs organization. But what I will say is that we need a really close partnership with that team in order to be successful, because there's a lot of adjacencies and there is a lot of collaboration that needs to happen. And there is, we need to make sure that we are on the same page and working as a team, because while they are slightly different, again, they can be very intertwined.
Yeah, that makes sense. So on the employer branding topic, you mentioned, and I've learned this too, it is a relatively new concept, right? I think that over the past few years, there's been a huge emphasis on organizations making themselves more attractive to employees because of a few reasons, right? The first reason is they want to attract the best people, and the best people want to work at the best companies, whether that's scientifically or culturally. And then the other reason is, if I'm not doing it, well, then I'm probably going to get beat out by the company next door to us because they're doing it, right? So it's a normal market evolution. And when it comes to employer branding, you've probably seen a ton of different things, a ton of different approaches, and I've seen a ton of different approaches, and some of them, I got to say, are totally wacky, in my opinion, right? Like you see this company and they have this brand, and their brand has absolutely nothing to do with the science and everything to do with the culture. And then you see another company where their brand has everything to do with the science and nothing to do with the culture. I'm curious to hear, and I don't think I used the word wacky earlier, but I do think some of it's a little wacky and some of it maybe is, for lack of a better term, shallow. But I do think there are some companies that do it really well, and they're able to integrate both the cultural piece and the scientific piece.
Okay, I couldn't agree more with that. Integrating I don't know how you separate it, right? Because I'll just use myself as an example. I care a lot about the work that I'm doing, and I want to feel like I'm making an impact and I'm making a difference in the lives of patients. And while, being a scientist wasn't in the cards for me, or that wasn't really, where I thought I could add value to an organization, right? I just am so impressed and humbled by the, clinicians and physicians and the scientists that we have, working at Biogen. So for me, you can't separate the science from the culture. They really are intertwined. I think at Biogen, and I should have probably said, I'm not a spokesperson for Biogen, right? I'm not speaking on behalf of Biogen. I'm just speaking about my experience with Biogen, right?
Yeah.
But, when I think about the science and the culture and the individuals that I've met and recruited and, been able to sit across a table from, they are so passionate about being in the neuroscience space, or they are so passionate about being part of an organization that isn't afraid to take risks, isn't afraid to tackle Alzheimer's, as an example. I mean, years ago, we saw so many companies exiting the neurospace and large pharma companies doing neuro risks. And we looked at that as an opportunity to get some of the best talent in the space, because we thought, okay, we're focused, we know what we're doing, and we're gonna go after this talent. And for them, the science was so important. from an employer perspective, right? They wanted to be somewhere that was focused in this space, not afraid to take risks, not afraid to solve the unsolvable, if that's possible, right? And so that becomes your culture, right? On the flip side, it's not just about the science. There are so many other things that Biogen does as an organization that keep me engaged and involved. If you think about our employer benefits, I mean, we have one of the most amazing, if I can say so, according to Katie McGee, benefits and also compensation programs. I mean, we were one of the first organizations this summer to launch a wellness week. And, that was a week where we gave our employees, time unexpectedly in the summer, when we're probably at the, a very busy part of the year, just to reset, right? And I think it was such an important acknowledgement of just what everyone has gone through for the last 3 or 4 years. And it was so nice to see that recognition. So, those types of investments, in our people, they have to go along with the science, or I think that's where you're going to feel wacky or flat, because it's not just about the science. There's so many other things that are involved in someone's day-to-day work. And so what we really try to focus on, what I've seen be really successful, is ensuring that our employees can truly bring their best selves, their most authentic selves to work, so they can make an impact on the science by taking care of a variety of things outside of that. So anyways, that's, I guess, a little bit of a rant on that, but I just so wholeheartedly believe that you have to have both.
Yeah, I tend to agree. Do you think there's a ratio, or like a perfect blend of, like, all right, we value and we want our culture to be, the majority of the emphasis, or we want the science to be the majority emphasis? Would you say one outweighs the other, or do you think maybe it's 50-50? What do you think the perfect blend is?
I mean, I think it's really dependent on the individual. So I wouldn't say, from a recruiting perspective, when I go out and look at talent, I say, okay, they need to be 80% into the pipeline and 20% into the rest of our culture. I think it's hard to separate. I think what I see, I think the question that you're getting at, right, is like, what do we look for? What is successful, right? Like, what makes someone a great employee? And for me, this isn't even specific to Biogen, but this is just specific to what I've seen. I think an innate curiosity and a drive to ask questions is one of the most reliable indicators of success. Someone that questions things and wants to not change things for the sake of change things, but they're faced with something and they don't just say, okay, well, that's how we've always done it, right? They say, oh, why do we do it that way? And what have we thought about doing it this way, right? So having that curiosity, whether you're in research or our corporate functions or our pharmaceutical operations and technology, that is a consistent theme that I think makes for a really, successful, transition into the organization.
Yeah, no, that sounds about right. I like that a lot. So let me pivot a little bit and switch topics. I think we got a really good idea of your take on employer branding and how it integrates into your role and your company as a whole. The last year, and I think Biogen probably has experienced this differently than some of the other Cambridge-based biotechs, but the last year has been really interesting for biotech, in that the market has changed from a funding and a financial perspective, and hiring has certainly shifted. I think it was, for lack of a better term, we'll call it was out of control for between 2019 and 2022, and the pandemic actually just emphasized how much more talent the biotech industry needs, and it did it in a really consolidated way, meaning that the demand became really, really high, really, really fast. And then there was a shift, probably mid-year, things kind of shifted a little bit. And so from your perspective, coming from a mid to large size biotech, as you've put it, or maybe you said more of a mid-sized biotech that's had successful track record and has approved products and is generating revenue. What's your take on the market? What trends have you seen in the market from a candidate perspective across all levels? I know you focus a lot on executive search, but yeah, what's your take?
Yeah, it's a great question because I think the last couple of years have had some wild trends. I think we've seen things that we've never seen before. I mean, you mentioned just the intense competition for talent that we saw, through the summer. I hadn't seen that. At least I don't remember it being so intense before in my career. So that was definitely something that I think forced us to evolve as a talent acquisition organization and really did force us to think about, how do we get the best talent and what do people want? And so I think it was great. I think it was great for organizations, and I think it was great for employees who were able to have a little bit more of a candidate market that we hadn't seen in a while. So I think that was good all around. Anytime I think an organization has to evolve and shift to meet demands, whether it's talent market or other markets, I think that's good for everyone, right? Evolution is good. So yeah, that was a big trend. I think what we've seen over the last couple months, or what I've seen over the last couple of months, is certainly a cooling off of that, but it's still very aggressive. So we had been in a situation where we were seeing multiple counter offers and extremely quick timelines, forced decision making, and I don't always love that because I think both a candidate and an organization need time and space to evaluate whether or not that future relationship is going to be valuable and fruitful for both of them. So I don't love whenever a recruitment timeline gets really condensed and people are having to make quick decisions. I don't think it's fair especially for a candidate. But we did see that over the summer. I think that's pulled off a little bit. I think what we are still seeing is, I guess I'll call it, this sounds negative, but I don't think it's negative, but I'll call it an unwillingness to compromise from a candidate perspective. I think that people have reevaluated their personal lives. They've reevaluated their futures and their careers. In some cases, they may have rebalanced things in their own, with their own perspectives. And so I think what we're seeing is, a lot of folks don't want to move their families for opportunities, and they, the willingness to relocate has shifted drastically, with the external talent market. So that's just, I think, a really palatable thing that we can point to, but I think it really points to an overall trend where individuals, they don't want to compromise and they don't feel like they have to compromise in ways that they previously did. And I think it's great because I think ultimately, candidates are being more realistic about what makes them happy and what is going to make them their best self at work. And so although it makes our jobs a little bit harder, I think it's a good thing that people are being more realistic about, those scenarios and what they want to do. So I think that's probably one of the bigger trends I've seen. But as you said, it has certainly cooled off a little bit.
Yeah. Obviously this is a big topic for everyone, which you were just mentioning, which is the working hybrid, working remote, and getting candidates to relocate. I almost feel that now, depending on your role, and for a lot of the more senior level roles, almost no candidates are willing to relocate. However, a lot of companies are offering remote hybrid work scenarios where as long as they can visit the site monthly or quarterly, that's fine. Some companies, I think, have been a little bit reluctant, or some companies might want to start going in the direction where, like, okay, we need everyone on site 3 or 4 days a week now. And some companies have said, you know what, this is better. We can access more talent now. We've opened things up. We've made things more flexible. This is our new approach to hiring and building our culture and building our team. What has been your experience in your organization's ability to flex on that candidate sentiment, which is now, I'm not relocating, but I'm happy to work for a company that is across the country or in a different time zone?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think I have really appreciated response to this. I think they have been, extremely flexible and agile in thinking about the different ways of working that we can tap into as an organization. That being said, I think there's also, we are an organization that, we have to be on site to manufacture our drugs. We have to be on site in the lab, pushing our science forward. So I think that there is a balance and an evolution that I think, just like every organization, we're still, working through. I think, as I said, I've been really impressed with sort of the flexibility and the willingness to work differently that I've seen, but I think it's difficult because there's real challenges, and there's a lot of competing views out there. So there are a lot of views that being in person fuels innovation, and you don't get those quick 5-minute catch-ups. And I was in the office a lot this week, and I was reminded at how energizing and exciting that can be to be sitting next to your peers and having those unplanned meetups and schedules and overhearing things and catch-ups, right? All of that has a value. And the trade-off to having, let's say, a completely remote workforce or a workforce that is rarely on site is, you don't get those things. So I think it's a very challenging topic that I think we are going to continue to evolve, over, the next many years. And I think, there's a lot to still learn about how we can be most effective as an organization while still offering some of that flexibility. And, what I will say, and this isn't just related to relocation, but, it's okay to sometimes walk away from talent, right? It's okay to say, that doesn't work for us, right? You're not willing to relocate. That's not in the cards for you. And you know what? That's not what we need, right? We do need someone on site. And that might mean that we don't get, a particular candidate that we're hoping to get. And I think that's okay, because I think as an organization, we also have to be smart and, good stewards. And it's the same thing that I would think about with compensation. I would say, you can't always just bend as an organization, because it throws other things out of whack from an equity perspective, just ways of working and all of that. So I know a lot of people talk about, like, we're going to lose talent, and I agree with that, absolutely. But there is also a line, right, where we say it's okay. It's okay to lose some talent. We can't make everyone happy.
Yeah, or else there's no controls, and then things go crazy.
Yeah,
makes total sense. And that actually, what you just mentioned, I think that was actually happening probably up until earlier this year. Mm-hmm. Some of that was not at Biogen, but at other companies. I think at the industry as a whole, I think there was a lot of clients or hiring managers and hiring teams and companies were, I said clients, from my perspective, clients, but hiring managers and companies were, I think, bending very, very hard for the candidate to get that talent in. And I think we saw a lot of title and price and salary inflation. And I think now there's kind of a reset in the market because it's unsustainable.
Right. It's unsustainable, and it's not equitable, right? Because that's, I think, one thing that Biogen, that I like to think that we, really focus on is equity across the organization. And when you only have a lens for, let's say, getting to yes, I think you lose the bigger picture, which is what are going to be the impacts to the organization that has, right? So let's take a hypothetical. You have an amazing candidate located on the West Coast, and most of our organization is, based on the East Coast, and we've got folks in, Switzerland. So from a time perspective, there's a lot of challenges there, and that doesn't mean we can't overcome them, but I think we need to think really thoughtfully around how do we set that person, let's say we say, okay, we're going to have this person work on the West Coast. How do we set them up for success? And how as an organization are we designed to accommodate that type of flex? And I think if you only flex and you don't also think about what you need to do as an organization to support that individual is likely to really struggle fitting into a culture that doesn't support it, right? So I think that's where it's like there's got to be a balance between flexibility and just, organizational design and effectiveness and how we're set up to operate. And I think as a medium to large, organization, it's really important that we think about those things.
Absolutely. No, I love that. It makes sense because, you explained it perfectly. So, we're talking about current market trends and what's going on and maybe what has recently gone on in the market. What's your outlook? Here we are. Today is November 18th of 2022. We're about to head into a new year. What's your outlook for the next few years within biotech, both locally? When I say locally, I mean in the Boston area and nationally.
So I feel like for the last couple of years, every time I thought I knew what was coming in the following year, I was mistaken. Is that just me or is that everyone?
It's just you. I'm kidding. No, I think it's hard to predict the future.
Yeah, what's just been, it feels like we got sped up in terms of how quickly things have pivoted year over year, and we go into a year and then all of a sudden it's the pandemic, and then we think the pandemic's going to be over, and then it's not, and then the political landscape was wildly unpredictable, and then the candidate market went crazy. So it's like I feel like I don't have a good handle on what the future will bring, but what I will say is that I think that there has been sort of this, we've been through this tumultuous situation. The last couple months, I think things started to stabilize, right? So you're seeing some of that, some of the cooling off in the market, and some of the realizations and the investments have been different, right? So I think that has happened, and then I think first and second quarter of next year, I think that's where we are going to start to see like what does the new normal really look like, right? What is the day-to-day? What is kind of the new long-term feel within the biotech and pharma space? So I don't know, but my prediction is that in the next few months will really start to show us what we're going to have in store for the next few years.
Yeah, no, I agree. I tend to feel that there's going to be a reversion to the mean somewhat, and not exactly to the mean, but I do think that things were hot for the last couple of years. Things were tumultuous for the last couple of years. Things have changed throughout that cycle, and I do think that we'll probably be looking at a market more so what we saw in 2016 through 2018, which is still a really strong market, but not a market that's out of control, and a market that's much more stable. That's what I'm hoping for. I do feel that in a lot of ways things do end up reverting to the mean, and maybe the mean is at a different place now because of what's happened over the last couple of years, but it's still more of a mean than it is a volatile situation.
Yeah. Well, I hope you are correct, because I think we all are looking forward to a little more stability, a less fluctuation, and I think we're all ready for that.
Yeah, I agree. Absolutely. All right. So this has been great. We've covered a lot of really, really deep topics. My last question for you, which is if you were to give somebody some advice who was just getting into recruiting or into talent acquisition, and that advice could be life advice, or it could be professional advice, or it could be both, what advice would you give a 23-year-old Katie Carroll?
Oh, wow. What a great question. I mean, the list is endless. I think, I will say some of these lessons that you learn, you just have to learn through, unfortunately, trial and error, as I'm sure we both can laugh about over a couple of beers, the things that we learned in our career. But one thing one piece of advice that I think is great for anyone in talent acquisition is learn how to be, a strategic advisor to your organization, right? So obviously, there's a lot of value in sort of the day-to-day operational aspects of recruiting and just, screening and moving the process forward and all of that. But I think the real value comes in when you can act as a market expert and when you can advise your clients or your organizations or your hiring managers or even your candidates on, next steps. And I think sometimes that gets missed because in recruiting, you're so busy when you're carrying a big rec load and you've got your head down and you're just working through everything. Sometimes you forget to pick your head up and really advise the business on what you know. And I think there's a lot of recruiters out there that are the experts in their market. They're experts in the candidate pool. They're experts in negotiation. And I think the faster you can get comfortable with flexing that advisory muscle and that strategic partner muscle, I think, the better off you'll be.
That's fantastic advice. What personal advice would you give somebody? Because as you know, and as I know, recruiting can be a total roller coaster emotionally for someone who's just entering the space. So and sometimes those emotions tend to go home with people. What would be your advice to somebody who's just entering the field from a personal standpoint?
Yeah, gosh, it's so difficult because I think that personal, I'd love to sit here and say, don't take it personally, don't care, you can't control people, people are not products, and, you can't control the outcome. But I actually don't know that that's helpful advice, because I think that caring and that drive and that need to succeed, that made me who I am as a recruiter, and I know it shaped you in the same way. So I know we had to go through some stressful moments and some downs and some really low lows and also some really great highs. So I don't know that I would say just turn that off and you can't control it, because I think there is actually a lot of things we can control from a personal perspective. But what I would say is, don't be afraid to take a risk. Don't be afraid to say, if you're unhappy in your career where you are, and you're saying, hey, I really want to go work for a cool boutique recruitment firm, but I'm just not sure, right? I would say don't be afraid to take a risk early in your career, because I think risks early in your career have paid off for me personally, and I'm sure there's a number of people that would probably give the opposite advice. But or if you're saying, hey, I really want to go in-house or I really want to get experience in XYZ area, I would say go for it. I think, a big risk that I took in my career was coming to Biogen, and I just sometimes I am startled by the reality of, what my career might look like if I hadn't taken that risk, right? So yeah. I would just say, don't be afraid to take risks.
I love it. It's almost what I was kind of hearing you say is, I guess from a personal standpoint, it's almost when if you stop, if you're really feeling the weight of recruiting, whether that's a negative weight or a positive, lift up, once you kind of stop feeling that, maybe it's time to actually leave, because there are so many emotions tied to recruiting. And if you really feel serious about a failure, it actually means you're probably in the right career, because you really care about that failure and how you can improve upon that failure. And yeah. So, right?
I don't know if that's advice I should be giving, right? A great recruiter that I've met cares They care if they get the best talent, right? They want to provide the best service to their hiring manager. They are just as, if not more, disappointed if a great candidate declines an offer or if we can't get a great candidate in the loop. So I think sometimes hiring managers don't understand that like that does often really impact really, really strong recruiters and recruiters that care a lot about the work they do. So, I think it's tough, right? I don't want to sit here and say like, oh, you shouldn't care, because I think we all know that's BS, right?
It's impossible.
Do care, we do. But I think to your point, like at some point you do have to realize like that there are only so many things you can control. So you have to go easy on yourself and you have to lose the guilt at some point. But, early in your career, I mean, I don't know.
Yeah. No, it's like mastering I think the from my perspective, and I think this is also what you're trying to say, is you can master the things you can control, but after you've mastered them, which takes some time, and once you've mastered them, after that, there's not anything else you can do, right?
Yeah. Yes, Tambo, that's correct. All of your listeners now know that I call you Tambo, but
you would be the first one to call me that on this recording.
Yes, exactly, right? It's like I do want, as an early career person, like I want you to hone those skills, because I think those feelings guide you in terms of knowing when I should have checked that on that candidate, or gosh, I had that gut feeling and I should have paid attention to it, right? Like all had those things. So I think, as you said, that's exactly it, right? I don't want to say don't have those feelings, because they make you the recruiter that you will be one day. But to your point, at some point, we have to say, okay, I've done what I can, and at the end of the day, I can't control what people decide to do. So I have to be okay with the fact that, I've done my best.
I love it. Katie, this was fantastic. After working with you and being friends with you for, I think, almost 12 years now, to be able to sit down and just take some time to go through some of the ins and outs of your recruiting experience and some of your strategies and your tactics and just your overall thoughts has been a pleasure. So thank you.
Thank you for having me, Chris. This was so much fun. Great way to start the morning.
Absolutely. Thanks, Katie.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Talent Therapy Podcast with Chris Tamburini. This show is for entertainment purposes only and is copywritten by Rana and Vance, LLC.